I am Anthony Redgrave, 34 years old, and 10 years ago, my own mother orchestrated the betrayal that ruined my life. She convinced the woman I loved to marry my brother because he needed her more. Before I tell you about the moment their faces turned white with terror, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The tires of the rented Rolls-Royce Phantom crunched softly against the gravel of the driveway. It was a sound I hadn't heard in a decade. The crunch of gravel used to mean home, but now it sounded like approaching enemy territory. My hands were gripping the leather steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles had turned white. I took a breath, trying to loosen my grip. "Breathe, Anthony." A soft voice came from the passenger seat. I looked over. Isabella was there, the picture of calm elegance. She wore a deep emerald dress that accentuated her eyes, and her hand reached out to cover mine. Her skin was warm against my cold, clammy palm. She didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. Just her touch was enough to anchor me. She was the steel in my spine. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, her voice low. "No," I admitted, staring at the house. It was a sprawling colonial estate in Connecticut, the kind of place that screamed old money and family values from the outside. But I knew what rotted behind those brick walls. "But we're doing it anyway. Remember," Isabella said, her thumb stroking the back of my hand. "You aren't that little boy anymore. You aren't the spare heir. You're Anthony Redgrave, the man who built a skyline." She was right, but stepping back into this driveway made me feel small again. It stripped away the layers of success, the millions in my bank account, and the reputation I had built in New York. Suddenly, I was 10 years old again, standing in this very driveway. I could see the memory playing out on the front lawn like a ghost film. I was 10. My brother, Derek, was 12. We were preparing for a family photo. I had spent 20 minutes polishing my shoes, combing my hair, and making sure my tie was straight. I stood tall, waiting for my mother's approval. Margaret Redgrave, my mother, had walked out onto the porch. She looked at me, her eyes sweeping over my neat appearance without a flicker of pride. Then she looked at Derek. Derek, whose shirt was untucked, whose shoes were untied, and who had chocolate smeared on his chin. "Oh, my poor baby," she had cooed, rushing past me to kneel in front of Derek. "Let mommy fix you up. You can't do it alone, can you? You need help. You're so sensitive." She tied his shoes. She tucked in his shirt. She wiped his face with her own handkerchief. I had stepped forward, holding out my report card. "Mom, I got straight A's. Teacher said I was the best in the class." She didn't even look up. "That's nice, Anthony. But look at your brother." He stood still while I tied his shoes. "Isn't he such a good boy?" She stood up, wrapping her arm around Derek, pulling him into the golden light for the photographer. "Come on, Derek. You're the star." Anthony moved to the side. "You're blocking your brother's light." Blocking his light. That was the theme of my life. I was the shadow. Derek was the sun. I was the provider. Derek was the consumer. I was the one who survived. Derek was the one who needed to be saved. "Anthony," Isabella's voice pulled me back to the present. The ghost of the 10-year-old boy vanished. I was 34. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. The suit was bespoke Italian silk, tailored to fit my frame perfectly. The watch on my wrist cost more than Derek's car. "Let's go," I said. We stepped out of the car. The air smelled the same, pine needles and damp earth, mixed with the faint, cloying scent of my mother's expensive roses. It was the scent of pretension. The front door was already open. I could hear the murmur of voices, the clinking of crystal glasses. It was a celebration of life for my father, Robert, who had passed away 3 weeks ago. But knowing my mother, it was just another stage for her to perform on. I took Isabella's arm. We walked up the steps. As soon as we crossed the threshold, the noise in the foyer died down. It wasn't a gradual silence. It was a sudden, sharp drop in volume. Heads turned. I recognized neighbors, old family friends, distant cousins. People who had watched me grow up and then watched me disappear. They whispered behind their hands, "Is that Anthony? He looks different." I thought he was working construction in the city. And then the crowd parted. Standing by the grand staircase, holding a glass of Chardonnay like a scepter, was my mother, Margaret Redgrave. She hadn't aged well. Her face was pulled tight by too many surgeries, her smile fixed and brittle. Next to her stood Derek, my brother, the golden child. He was wearing a suit that was a little too tight around the middle, his face flushed with alcohol. And clinging to his arm, looking pale and tired, was Elena. Elena, the woman I had planned to marry. The woman who was now my sister-in-law. Our eyes met. Elena's eyes widened. She looked from me to Isabella, and I saw a flash of something that looked like pain, or maybe just regret. My mother stepped forward. She didn't smile. She didn't open her arms. She looked at me with a mixture of disdain and annoyance, as if I were a muddy dog that had tracked dirt onto her Persian rug. "Anthony," she said, her voice carrying across the silent room. "You actually came." "Hello, Mother," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's Father's memorial. Of course I came." "We didn't think you'd have the time," she said, taking a sip of her wine. "Or the money for the flight. Derek was just saying we should have sent you a bus ticket." A few people chuckled nervously. Derek smirked, raising his glass. "Yeah, little brother. Times are tough, right? We didn't want you to starve on the way here. 10 years ago, that would have crushed me. I would have stuttered, tried to defend myself, tried to prove I was worthy. Now, I just smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. "I managed," I said simply. "Mother, Derek. This is my wife, Isabella." Isabella stepped forward, her chin high. She didn't offer her hand. She simply nodded. "Mrs. Redgrave, my condolences for your loss." My mother looked Isabella up and down. She saw the dress, but she didn't recognize the designer. She saw the simple pearl earrings, but she didn't know they were South Sea pearls worth a small fortune. To my mother, simplicity meant poverty. "Wife." Mother let out a short, sharp laugh. "You got married? And you didn't tell us? Well, I suppose a small courthouse wedding is all you could afford. It's fine, dear. Not everyone can have a wedding like Derek and Elena's." She turned to the crowd, raising her voice again. "Everyone, this is Anthony's wife. Be kind to her. I'm sure she's not used to this kind of company." It was a masterful insult. In 3 sentences, she had dismissed my marriage, insulted my financial status, and belittled my wife. I felt Isabella's arm tense under mine, but not from anger. She was holding back laughter. "Thank you for the warm welcome," Isabella said, her voice smooth as velvet. "We won't stay long. We just wanted to pay our respects to Robert." Right. Derek waved his hand dismissively. "Go grab a drink, Tony. The cheap beer is in the back cooler. Save the wine for the investors. I have some very important people coming tonight." "Investors?" I asked. "Big things happening, little brother." Derek puffed out his chest. "I'm closing a deal with Vance Global. You've probably never heard of them. Living in your little world. They're only the biggest real estate conglomerate in the tri-state area." I felt Isabella squeeze my arm. Hard. "Vance Global," I repeated. "Yes, I've heard of them. I'm going to be their regional director," Derek bragged, loud enough for the room to hear. "Mom set it up. She knows people. Finally, this family is going to have the power it deserves." My mother beamed at him, reaching up to pat his cheek. "My brilliant boy, you were born for greatness, Derek. Unlike some people who just exist." She shot a glare at me. I looked at Isabella. Her eyes were dancing with amusement. They had no idea. They were bragging about working for Vance Global to the woman whose last name was Vance. "Well," I said, "congratulations, Derek. I look forward to seeing how that works out for you." "Just don't ask for a loan," Derek sneered. "My money is tied up in assets." "I wouldn't dream of it," I said. As we moved away from them, walking deeper into the room, the whispers followed us. I could feel the eyes of the town on my back. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the weight of their judgment. I felt the weight of the hand grenade I was holding in my pocket. and I was just waiting for the right moment to pull the pin. The smell of my mother's perfume, Chanel No. 5 mixed with something bitter, triggered a memory so visceral I almost stumbled. Standing there in the corner of the living room, watching Derek hold court with a glass of scotch he hadn't earned, I was transported back 10 years. I was 24 then, and I was happy. I had met Elena in college. She was studying art history and I was in architecture. She was soft, kind, and she looked at me like I was the only person in the room. For a guy who had grown up invisible, that gaze was addictive. I wanted to give her the world. I had just landed my first junior architect job at a small firm in the city. It wasn't much money, but it was a start. I decided it was time to bring her home. "Are you sure?" Elena had asked in the car, twisting a strand of her blonde hair. "You make your mother sound intense. She just wants the best for us." I had lied. I wanted to believe it. "Once she sees how great you are, she'll love you." I was a fool. The dinner was a disaster from the start. I had worn my best shirt. I had brought flowers. Elena had made a homemade cherry pie. We sat at the long mahogany dining table. My father sat at the head, silent as usual, pushing peas around his plate. My mother sat opposite him. Derek sat across from me. "So," my mother said, not touching her food, "Anthony says you're an artist, Elena. Does that pay?" "I work at a gallery, Mrs. Redgrave," Elena said politely, "and I paint on weekends." "A hobby," Mother sniffed. "How quaint." "Derek, tell them about your new venture." Derek leaned back, grinning. He was unemployed at the time, having been fired from his third job in a year for creative differences, which meant showing up late. "I'm looking into crypto," he said. "Big potential. Huge returns. I just need a little seed capital." "Isn't that exciting?" Mother beamed. "Derek has such a vision. He's a dreamer. Anthony is so practical. He just draws lines on paper." "I design houses, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I just got promoted." She waved a hand dismissively. Yes, a worker bee. Derek is a queen bee. He leads." The dinner continued like that. Every achievement of mine was minimized. Every failure of Derek's was spun into gold. I could see Elena getting uncomfortable. I reached under the table and squeezed her hand. She squeezed back, but her grip was weak. After dinner, I went to help my father with the dishes, a task Derek never touched. That left Elena alone with my mother and Derek in the living room. That was my mistake. I left the sheep with the wolves. I washed the plates quickly, my heart pounding. I wanted to get Elena out of there. When I dried my hands and walked back toward the living room, I heard voices. I stopped in the hallway, hidden by the shadow of the staircase. "He's a good boy, Anthony." My mother's voice was low, conspiratorial. "But he's cold. He's obsessed with his work. He'll never be home. He's just like his father. Boring. Stable, yes, but passionless." "He loves me," Elena said, but her voice sounded uncertain. "Does he?" Mother countered. "Or does he just want a trophy?" "Anthony is self-sufficient, Elena. He doesn't need anyone. He's hard. But Derek? Look at him." I could hear the smile in her voice. "Derek feels things deeply," she continued. "He needs a woman to ground him. He needs a muse. He needs someone to take care of him. And in return, he would worship the ground she walks on. Anthony will just expect you to be there. Derek will need you." I never thought about it like that," Elena whispered. "Think about your future, dear," Mother said. "Do you want a life of solitude with a workaholic? Or a life of adventure with a man who has a fire in his soul? Plus, Derek is the heir. This house, the investments, it all goes to the one who carries the family name with pride. Anthony has always been distant." It was a lie. A calculated, vicious lie. I was the one who fixed the roof. I was the one who mowed the lawn. Derek was the one who gambled away his allowance. But she was painting a picture where Derek was the romantic hero and I was the unfeeling robot. I walked into the room then. The conversation stopped abruptly. Ready to go, Elena? I asked. She looked up at me. Her eyes were different. The warmth was gone, replaced by a calculating assessment. She was looking at me and seeing what my mother wanted her to see. A boring, cold man. Then she looked at Derek. He gave her a charming, boyish grin, the weapon he used to get away with murder. Yeah, she said. Let's go. The car ride home was silent. 3 days later, she broke up with me. We were sitting in my small apartment. She wouldn't even sit down. I just don't think we want the same things, Anthony, she said, reciting a script. What do you mean? Pleaded. We talked about marriage. We talked about kids. You're just so focused on your career, she said. I feel like you don't need me. You're so strong, you know? You'll be fine on your own. I need you, I said, my voice cracking. I love you. Not like. She stopped herself. I just need someone who is more open, more vulnerable. She left. I was heartbroken. I spent 2 weeks in a daze, barely functioning at work. I thought I had just lost her to bad timing. Then, 2 months later, the invitation arrived. It was heavy cream cardstock with gold lettering. Mr. and Mrs. Redgrave request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their son, Derek Redgrave, to Elena Fisher. I stared at the paper until the words blurred. 2 months. They were getting married in 2 months. I called my mother. Mom, I choked out. Did you know? Oh, Anthony, she sighed, sounding bored. Don't be dramatic. They fell in love. It happens. You weren't right for her anyway. You were stifling her creativity. Derek liberates her. They've been together for 2 months, I shouted. They've known each other since that dinner, she corrected. The soul recognizes its mate. You should be happy for your brother. Finally, he's settling down. This will be the making of him. He needs the stability. He needs my girlfriend? She wasn't yours, she snapped. She was a free agent, and she chose the better man. Now grow up and RSVP. We need a head count for the caterer. And wear something nice. Don't embarrass us. She hung up. I sat on my floor, holding the invitation. I felt like my chest had been hollowed out with a rusty spoon. It wasn't just the heartbreak. It was the theft. My mother had looked at the one thing that made me happy, decided her precious Derek needed it more, and simply reassigned it. She treated people like furniture. She had moved Elena from my room to Derek's because she thought it improved the feng shui of Derek's life. I wanted to scream. I wanted to burn the house down. But I didn't. Instead, I made the worst decision of my life. I decided to go to the wedding. Going to that wedding was an act of masochism. I told myself I was going out of dignity to show them I wasn't broken. In reality, a small, stupid part of me hoped Elena would see me in my suit, realize she had made a mistake, and run away with me. Spoiler alert. Life isn't a romantic comedy. It's a tragedy written by people with agendas. The ceremony was held in the garden of our family estate. The very garden I used to weed every summer while Derek sat on the porch drinking lemonade. My mother had spared no expense. There were white doves, a string quartet, and an archway of imported orchids. I sat in the 3rd row, not the 1st. The 1st row was for immediate family. Apparently, the brother of the groom didn't qualify if he was also the ex of the bride. When Elena walked down the aisle, she looked beautiful. But she didn't look happy. She looked expensive. She was wearing a necklace I knew my mother had loaned her. A family heirloom that was supposed to go to the eldest son's wife. Technically, that was Derek, but morally it felt like another theft. When the priest asked if anyone objected, I gripped the pew in front of me so hard the wood creaked. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to shout, "She's only marrying him because my mother promised to pay off her student loans." A fact I suspected then, but confirmed later. But I stayed seated. I let it happen. The reception was worse. I was sitting at a table near the kitchen door, far away from the head table. I was picking at my salmon when the DJ announced the speeches. And now, the DJ boomed. A few words from the mother of the groom. Margaret Redgrave took the microphone. She looked radiant, victorious. My heart is so full, she began. To see my Derek, my sunshine, finally find a woman worthy of him. Elena, you are the daughter I never had. She paused for effect. You know, some people didn't believe in Derek. Some people thought he was too free-spirited. She glanced toward my corner. But I knew he just needed the right partner. True love isn't about logic or spreadsheets. It's about passion. The crowd cheered. And now, she smiled, a cruel glint in her eyes, I'd like to invite Anthony up to say a few words. Come on, Anthony. Wish your brother well. My blood froze. This wasn't planned. She was ambushing me. She wanted to see me bend the knee. She wanted the public satisfaction of seeing me validate this theft. Anthony! Anthony! The crowd started chanting. They didn't know the history. They just saw a brother being shy. I stood up. My legs felt like lead. I walked to the microphone. The lights were blinding. I looked at Derek. He was smirking, his arm possessively around Elena's waist. I looked at Elena. She was staring at her lap. I took the mic. The silence was heavy. My voice rasped, cleared my throat. I have known Elena for 2 years. A murmur went through the crowd. And I have known Derek my whole life. I looked directly at my mother. And I know exactly what this is. I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a deafening screech of feedback. Screech. I turned and walked away. Anthony, get back here. My mother hissed, forgetting her microphone etiquette. Don't you dare walk away from this family. I kept walking. I walked past the cake, past the gift table, past the judging eyes of the town. I made it to the edge of the driveway, my chest heaving, tears stinging my eyes. I was heading for my old beat-up sedan when a voice stopped me. Anthony. It was my father, Robert Redgrave. He was standing in the shadows of the garage. He looked older, smaller than I remembered. He was wearing his tuxedo, but his tie was undone. Dad? I wiped my face. I'm leaving. Don't try to stop me. I'm not stopping you, he said softly. He walked over to me. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, white envelope. Take this, he said, shoving it into my hand. What is it? It's not much, he whispered, looking back toward the party to make sure Mother wasn't watching. It's my fishing fund. Cash. About $5,000. Your mother doesn't know about it. Dad, I can't. Take it. He grabbed my shoulders. His grip was surprisingly strong. Listen to me, son. Go. Get out of here. This place. This family. We are poison to you. Your mother. She won't stop until she's consumed everything to feed Derek's ego. She broke you to fix him. Why don't you leave? I asked, looking at the man I had always thought was weak. I'm too old, he said sadly. I made my bed. But you have a life. Go to New York. Go to London. Go anywhere but here. He hugged me. It was a quick, rough hug. You're the best of us, Anthony. Never forget that. Now go. Before she notices I'm gone. I drove away with $5,000 in my pocket and a hole in my heart. I went to New York City. The first year was hell. The $5,000 didn't last long in Manhattan. I couldn't get a job in a top firm because I was too depressed to interview well, and my portfolio felt like a lie. I ended up working construction during the day and doing freelance drafting at night. I lived in a basement apartment in Queens that smelled of mold and boiled cabbage. I ate instant noodles. I lost weight. I stopped answering my mother's calls, which were rare anyway, and ignored Derek's texts asking for money. But the anger kept me warm. One night, about 6 months after I left, I was scrolling through an architectural design forum. I saw a post that made my blood run cold. Local visionary Derek Redgrave pitches Green Sanctuary Estate Project. I clicked the link. There was a photo of Derek standing in a suit, pointing at a blueprint. My blueprint. It was my thesis project from college. The Eco Sanctuary. I had left my sketches in my old room at home. He had stolen them. He had put his name on my work and was pitching it to investors. I read the article. He was looking for $2 million in funding. I sat there in my damp basement, shaking with rage. I wanted to sue him. I wanted to scream. But then I read the comments. This design makes no structural sense. The load-bearing walls are missing in the east wing. Who drew this? The drainage system would flood the foundation in a week. Great concept, terrible execution. Investor pass. I laughed. A harsh, barking laugh. Derek had stolen the drawings, but he hadn't stolen the brain that made them. He didn't understand the engineering behind the pretty pictures. He was pitching a house that would collapse. That was the moment I realized something crucial. They could steal my girlfriend. They could steal my drawings. They could steal my past. But they couldn't steal my talent. They couldn't steal my future unless I let them. I closed the laptop. I stood up. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror on the wall. I looked gaunt, tired, and defeated. No more, I said to the empty room. The next day I shaved. I put on my one good suit. I walked into the offices of Urban Green, a rising landscape architecture firm, and I didn't ask for a job. I demanded 5 minutes with the owner. I got the job. I worked 18 hours a day. I didn't date. I didn't party. I built. I saved. I invested. And 2 years later, on a rainy Tuesday in Central Park, I met her. I was sitting on a wet bench in Central Park, sketching the drainage patterns of the walkway for a proposal I was working on. It was drizzling and most sensible people were inside. You know, a voice said from under a large black umbrella, if you adjust the gradient by 2 degrees, the water would flow into the flower beds instead of pooling on the concrete. I looked up. Standing there was a woman. She was wearing a simple trench coat and rain boots. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore no makeup. But her eyes, they were sharp, intelligent, and fiercely gray. I was just thinking that, I said, shielding my sketchpad. But the city code requires a specific runoff angle. City Code 14B serves as a guideline, not a shackle, she countered, sitting down next to me without asking. If you file it under environmental sustainability, rather than drainage, you get more leeway. I stared at her. Who are you? Isabella, she said, extending a hand. Her grip was firm. And you're ruining your paper. That was how I met my wife. Not at a gala, not on a yacht, but in the rain arguing about municipal drainage codes. We started meeting for coffee. I thought she was a city planner or maybe a civil engineer. She never talked about her family, and I never talked about mine. We were two intellects who found comfort in each other's competence. After my experience with Elena, who needed constant validation and reassurance, Isabella was a breath of fresh air. She didn't need me to complete her. She challenged me. One evening, 6 months into dating, I brought her to a small Italian restaurant in the village. It wasn't fancy, but the food was honest. I'm starting my own firm, I told her nervously. Redgrave Landscapes. Isabella swirled her wine. It's about time. You're too good to work for someone else. Do you have a business plan? I have a vision, I said, but the financing is tight. I can look at your numbers, she offered. That night, back at her apartment, which was surprisingly modest, though in a very good building, she tore my business plan apart. She didn't do it to hurt me. She did it to make it bulletproof. You're undervaluing yourself, she said, tapping a red pen on my spreadsheet. Double your fee. Double? No one will pay that. They will if you position it as a luxury service, she said. Don't sell a garden, Anthony. Sell a sanctuary. Rich people pay for peace, not plants. I listened to her. I doubled my rates. And she was right. My business exploded. We fell in love in the quiet moments between work. We fell in love over late-night Chinese takeout and early morning site visits. I fell in love with her mind, her strength, and the way she looked at me. Not as a project to be fixed, but as a man to be respected. 2 years after we met, I proposed. I didn't have a lot of liquid cash. Everything was reinvested in the business, so I bought a vintage sapphire ring. It wasn't huge, but it was unique. I took her back to that bench in Central Park. Isabella, I said, kneeling on the damp pavement. I don't have a big family to offer you. I don't have an inheritance. All I have is my name, my work, and my heart. But they are all yours if you want them. She looked at me, her eyes softening. Anthony, she said, taking my face in her hands, I don't want an inheritance. I have enough baggage of my own. I just want you. I want the man who builds things that last. She said yes. We got married at City Hall. No guests, just us and a witness. I pulled off the street. It was perfect. It was only after we were married that the layers of Isabella started to peel back. It started with small things. She would take calls in French and Mandarin. She knew an unusual amount about corporate mergers. Once, we walked past a skyscraper in Midtown, and she muttered, "We need to clean those windows," as if she were responsible for the building. One night, I came home to find her sitting at our kitchen table, surrounded by documents. She looked serious. "Anthony," she said, "we need to talk. There are things about my family I haven't told you." My stomach dropped. "Are you in trouble? Debt?" She laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "The opposite." She slid a magazine across the table. It was Forbes. On the cover was an older man, looking stern. The headline read, "The Death of a Titan. Marcus Vance Leaves Empire to Mystery Daughter." "That's my father," she said softly. I stared at the magazine. Marcus Vance, the owner of Vance Global. Real estate, shipping, tech. Billions. You're Isabella Vance?" I whispered. "I use my mother's maiden name socially," she said. "I wanted to know that people liked me, Anthony. Not my money. Not my father's power. When I met you, you didn't look at my shoes or my bag. You looked at my sketch. You fell in love with the nerd in the raincoat." "I married a billionaire," I said, stunned. "Technically multi-billionaire," she corrected. "Does it change anything?" I looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes. The fear that I would change. That I would become like everyone else who wanted a piece of her. I reached out and took her hand. "It means you can afford to pay for dinner tonight. I'm craving pizza." She burst into tears of relief. From that day on, we were a team. A power couple, though the world didn't know it yet. I ran my landscape architecture firm and she ran, well, the world. She kept her identity low profile, managing the empire through a board of directors, but she was the puppet master. We lived a good life. We were happy. But the past has a way of knocking on the door. It happened on a Tuesday. My phone rang. A number I hadn't seen in 10 years. "Hello," I answered. "Anthony." It was my mother. Her voice wasn't sad. It was urgent. "Your father is dead." I felt a sharp pang in my chest. "What? When?" "Yesterday. Heart attack," she said, skipping over the grief. "Listen, the funeral is Friday. You need to come home. And Anthony, bring your checkbook. The estate is in a bit of a situation. We need to settle some things." She didn't ask how I was. She didn't comfort me. She asked for money. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall. "Anthony," Isabella walked in. She saw my face and immediately knew. "What happened?" "My dad died," I said. "And my mother wants money." Isabella's face hardened. She walked over to her laptop and opened it. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "Redgrave," she muttered. "Connecticut. Let me see. What are you doing?" "I'm looking at their financials," she said. "If they are asking you for money, they must be desperate." She clicked a few keys, then stopped. Her eyebrows shot up. "Oh," she said. "Oh, this is interesting." "What?" She turned the laptop toward me. "Your brother, Derek. He's listed as the CEO of a shell company that just defaulted on a massive loan. And guess who holds the debt?" I looked at the screen. The creditor was a subsidiary of Vance Global. "You do," I said. Isabella smiled. It wasn't her nice smile. It was a shark smile. "We own them, Anthony," she said. "Your mother, your brother. Technically, I own the mortgage on their house and the debt on Derek's failed business." She stood up and walked over to me, placing her hands on my shoulders. They want you to come home? She asked. Fine, let's go home. But we aren't going there to pay their bills, my love. We are going there to collect. The days leading up to our return were a blur of calculated precision. While I mourned my father, quietly, privately, remembering the man who snuck me fishing money, Isabella went to work. I watched a side of my wife I rarely saw, the CEO. She turned our dining room into a war room. Stacks of files appeared. If we are going to do this, she told me over coffee one morning, we do it with surgical precision. No yelling, no drama. We use paper. Paper cuts deeper than knives. What did you find? I asked, looking at a dossier labeled Derek Redgrave. Your brother is a fraud, Anthony. But not just a lazy fraud. A criminal one. She flipped the folder open. He applied for a business loan 3 years ago. The collateral was your parents' house. He forged your father's signature. He what? Your father didn't know the house was mortgaged, Isabella said grimly. Derek took the money, $500,000, and invested it in a crypto scheme that went bust. He's been paying the interest with credit cards, but the balloon payment is due next month. He can't pay it. That's why your mother called you. She knows. She co-signed. Isabella pointed to a signature. Margaret Redgrave. She knew he forged Dad's name, and she helped him do it. She bet the house on Derek. I felt a wave of nausea. My father had died in a house he didn't even know he might lose. He worked his whole life for that estate, and my mother handed it to Derek to gamble away. There's more, Isabella said. Elena. What about her? She's been contacting divorce lawyers. Isabella slid a printout across the table. She reached out to a firm in Boston last week. She's looking for an exit strategy. But she can't leave because she signed a prenup that gives her nothing if she leaves within 10 years. They've been married 9 years and 11 months. I stared at the papers. So she's waiting for the clock to run out? Exactly. It's a nest of vipers, Anthony. And they are all turning on each other. Isabella closed the file. The subsidiary that holds their mortgage? I had my team expedite the foreclosure notice. But I put a hold on the delivery. I want to deliver the news personally. You want to foreclose on my childhood home? I asked. I want to give you the power to decide what happens to it, she corrected. I bought the debt personally. I am the bank. You are the bank. When we walk into that party, you aren't the little brother begging for scraps. You are the landlord. She stood up and kissed my forehead. Now go get fitted for your suit. We need to look the part. That brought us back to the present. The party. The smell of cheap wine and desperation masked by expensive perfume. We moved through the crowd. I shook hands with old neighbors. Anthony, is that you? You look prosperous. Mrs. Gable, the town gossip, said, eyeing my watch. I've been fortunate, Mrs. Gable, I said politely. And this is? Isabella, my wife. Charmed? Isabella said, flashing a dazzling smile that didn't reach her eyes. I could see Derek and Mother working the room. They were desperate. I could see the sweat on Derek's brow. He was cornering a man I recognized. Mr. Henderson, a local banker. Derek was talking fast, using his hands too much. Mr. Henderson looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. He's pitching, I whispered to Isabella. He's drowning, she corrected. Then the music stopped. My mother tapped a spoon against her glass. Ting, ting, ting. Everyone, if I could have your attention. The room went quiet. Thank you all for coming to celebrate the life of my beloved Robert, she began, wiping a dry eye. He would have been so happy to see you all here, but life goes on, and we must look to the future. She gestured to Derek. He stepped forward, puffing out his chest. Our family has always been a pillar of this community, Mother continued. And today, even in our grief, we have wonderful news. My son, Derek, the head of the family now, has secured a partnership that will secure the Redgrave legacy for generations. My stomach tightened. Here it comes. Derek has been in talks with the prestigious Vance Global Corporation, she announced. A murmur of impressed whispers went through the room. And I am proud to announce that he will be spearheading their new regional development division. Derek beamed. Thank you, Mom. Yes, it's true. Big things are coming. We're going to put this town on the map. Elena stood next to him, clapping mechanically. She looked like a ghost. I'd also like to take a moment, Derek said, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me, to welcome my little brother back. Anthony. The spotlight of the room turned to me. Anthony has had a harder path, Derek said, his voice dripping with condescension. But we're glad he could scrape together the funds to be here. Maybe once the Vance deal goes through, I can find a spot for you on the maintenance crew, Tony? We always need guys to dig holes. The room chuckled. It was a nervous, cruel sound. I felt the heat rise in my neck. Not shame. Rage. Isabella stepped forward. She didn't ask for permission. She just walked into the center of the room. Her heels clicked on the hardwood floor like gunshots. That's a very generous offer, Isabella said, her voice clear and projecting to the back of the room. Derek looked confused. Thanks. And you are? I'm Anthony's wife, she said. She stopped 5 feet from Derek. She was shorter than him, but she loomed over him. Right? Wife, Derek smirked. Well, honey, the men are talking business. Why don't you go find the buffet? Business, Isabella repeated. Yes, let's talk business. You mentioned Vance Global. Yeah, my partners, Derek bragged. I'm meeting with the CEO next week to sign the final papers. Really? Isabella tilted her head. That's strange. What's strange? Mother snapped, stepping in to defend her cub. Who are you to question him? Isabella turned to my mother. It's strange, she said. Because I don't remember scheduling a meeting with you, Derek. The room went dead silent. Excuse me? Derek laughed nervously. You? What are you talking about? My name, Isabella said, is Isabella Vance. My father was Marcus Vance. The silence that followed Isabella's declaration was absolute. It wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. The air had been sucked out of the room. Derek's smile froze. It didn't fade naturally. It just stuck there, twitching at the corners like a glitching video screen. My mother, who had been in the middle of a sip of wine, stopped with the glass halfway to her mouth. Vance? Derek croaked. No, that's common name. Isabella reached into her small clutch. She pulled out a business card. It wasn't paper. It was heavy, black metal with gold engraving. She flicked it toward him. It spun through the air and landed on the table next to him with a heavy clink. Vance Global, Isabella said, her voice ice cold. CEO and chairwoman of the board. That's me. Derek looked at the card. He looked at Isabella. He looked at me. But, he stammered. You're with Anthony. Anthony digs holes. Anthony, Isabella said, reaching back to take my hand and pulling me forward to stand beside her, is the owner of Redgrave Landscapes, the premier architectural firm in New York City. He is also my husband and my primary advisor. My mother finally dropped her glass. It hit the floor and shattered, red wine splashing onto the hem of her cream-colored dress. She didn't even notice. You. Mother pointed a shaking finger at me. You married her. I did, I said. 10 years ago, you told Elena that I was boring, that I didn't have a future, that Derek was the visionary. I looked at Derek. Tell me, Derek, what is your vision for the partnership you lied about? I didn't lie, Derek shouted, panic setting in. I sent the emails. I talked to a recruiter. You talked to a bot, Isabella said dismissively. My AI filters out thousands of unsolicited applications a day. Your proposal was flagged as low-quality spam 3 months ago. Someone in the back of the room snorted. That's not true, Derek yelled. Mom, tell them. But we can talk business, Derek, Isabella continued, relentless. Since you brought it up, let's talk about the loan #892B. Derek's face went from red to ghostly white. The loan you took out against this house. Isabella said. The one you forged your father's signature on. Gasps erupted from the neighbors. Mrs. Gable looked like she was about to faint from excitement. You know about that? Mother whispered. I own the debt, Isabella said. Vance Global acquires distressed assets. And this family? You are a very distressed asset. She pulled a folded document from her bag. This is a notice of default, she said. You haven't made a payment in 6 months. The interest has compounded. As of this morning, you owe the principal plus $150,000 in penalties. We can pay it, Derek blustered. I have investors. You have nothing, I cut in. My voice was calm, but it echoed in the room. I checked your accounts, Derek. You have 4 maxed-out credit cards and a checking account that's overdrawn by $300. You're broke. And you... I turned to my mother. You helped him do it. You let him steal Dad's legacy. I did it for the family, Mother shrieked. Your brother needed a chance. He just needed a break. You have everything, Anthony. You always had it easy. Easy. I laughed. It was a raw sound. I worked construction while you bought him a BMW. I ate ramen while you threw him weddings. I built my life from scratch because you kicked me out with nothing. I gave you life, she screamed. And you took my life. I roared back. You took Elena. I looked at Elena. She was standing by the window, tears streaming down her face. She wasn't looking at Derek. She was looking at me. Anthony, she whispered. Is it true? You own your own firm. Don't, I said, cutting her off. Don't do the math, Elena. Don't calculate if I'm a better option now. It's too late. I didn't know, she sobbed. Your mother told me. You made your choice, I said. You chose the golden child. I turned back to Derek. He was trembling. So here is the deal, Isabella said, stepping in for the kill. I could foreclose on this house tomorrow. I could have the sheriff here by noon to throw your furniture on the lawn. I could press charges for the forgery. That's 5 to 10 years in prison, Derek. Derek fell to his knees. Literally. He collapsed. Please, Anthony, Tony, I'm your brother. Now I'm your brother? I asked. 5 minutes ago I was the guy who digs holes. Mom made me do it, Derek cried. She said it was the only way. You coward, I spat. However, Isabella said, Anthony has asked me to be merciful. They all looked at me with pathetic hope. You have 30 days, I said. 30 days to vacate the property. Sell what you can. Pack your bags. And get out. 30 days. Mother gasped. But where will I go? This is my home. It was Dad's home, I said. And you gambled it away. You can go to a retirement home. I hear Shady Pines has vacancies. I'll pay for the first month. Consider it my final gift. And Derek? Mother asked. Derek is on his own, I said. He's the visionary, remember? I'm sure he'll figure it out. Anthony, please. Elena stepped forward. I have nowhere to go. I signed the prenup. Actually, Isabella interrupted. About that prenup. Protects assets owned by Derek. Since Derek owns nothing, in fact, he owns negative assets, the prenup is irrelevant. However, the debt is marital. Meaning, Elena, you are liable for half of Derek's debt. Elena screamed. It was a sound of pure horror. But, Isabella continued, if you divorce him and testify about the forgery, my lawyers might be inclined to forgive your portion of the debt. Elena looked at Derek. Derek looked at Elena. I'll do it, Elena said instantly. Elena, Derek shouted. You traitor. You broke. She screamed back. You lied to me for 10 years. The room dissolved into chaos. Derek and Elena were screaming at each other. My mother was sobbing on the floor, trying to wipe the wine stain off her dress. The neighbors were watching the best show of their lives. Isabella took my hand. Ready to go? She asked. I looked at the house one last time. It didn't look like a castle anymore. It looked like a tomb. Yeah, I said. I'm ready. We walked out the front door, leaving the noise behind us. The air outside was cool and clean. We got into the Rolls-Royce. As we drove down the driveway, I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to. I knew the past was burning, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one in the fire. I looked at Isabella. "You were amazing," I said. She smiled, leaning her head on my shoulder. "Nobody messes with my husband." The silence inside the Rolls-Royce as we drove away from the estate wasn't empty. It was heavy, filled with the adrenaline of a bomb that had finally detonated. My hands were still shaking slightly on the wheel, not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of what we had just done. We had nuked my entire past in less than 20 minutes. Isabella didn't say a word for the first 5 miles. She just reached over and rested her hand on my thigh, a silent anchor in the storm. "Are you okay?" she asked softly as we hit the highway. "I don't know," I admitted, staring at the road stretching out in the headlights. "I feel light, like I've been carrying a backpack full of bricks for 10 years, and someone just cut the straps." "We aren't done yet, Anthony," Isabella said, her voice shifting back to that sharp, so tone. "We popped the blister, but we still have to clean the wound. Tomorrow morning, the lawyers will be there to formalize the eviction and the debt restructuring. You need to be there." "I know," I sighed. "I want to look them in the eye when they sign the papers." The next morning, the sun rose over Connecticut with a cruel cheerfulness. The sky was a perfect, cloudless blue, completely at odds with the destruction waiting for us back at the Redgrave estate. We arrived at 10 a.m. sharp. This time, we didn't bring the rolls. We brought a team, 2 lawyers from Isabella's firm, a forensic accountant, and a security detail. It looked like a raid, and in many ways it was. The front door was unlocked. We walked in to find the aftermath of a hurricane. The house was a mess. Wine stains on the carpet, broken glass in the corner. My mother was sitting on the sofa in her bathrobe, looking 20 years older than she had the night before. Derek was pacing the room, looking hungover and terrified. Elena was nowhere to be seen. "You're back," Mother said, her voice raspy. "To gloat, to settle the accounts," I said, sitting in the armchair opposite her. Isabella stood behind me, a sentinel in a tailored power suit. One of the lawyers placed a stack of documents on the coffee table. "Mrs. Redgrave, Mr. Redgrave," the lawyer began. "These are the terms of the deed in lieu of foreclosure. You sign the house over to Vance Global immediately. In exchange, we agree not to pursue criminal charges for the forgery of Robert Redgrave's signature." "Criminal charges," Mother whispered, her hands trembling. "It's prison or the pen, Mom," I said coldly. "Sign the house over. It's gone anyway." Derek stopped pacing. He looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed. "Tony, come on. Where am I supposed to go? I have debts. The guys I borrowed from, they aren't banks. They break legs." "You should have thought about that before you stole my design," I said, not blinking. "And before you stole my father's house." "I needed the money," Derek shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "You don't understand the pressure. Mom told everyone I was a genius. I had to keep up appearances." "So you stole from me?" A voice came from the hallway. We all turned. Elena was standing there. She was dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, holding a small suitcase. Her eyes were puffy, but her jaw was set. "Elena," Derek asked, "where are you going?" "I'm leaving, Derek," she said. She walked into the room, but she didn't look at him. She looked at me. "But before I go, there's something Anthony needs to know. Something I should have told him 10 years ago." "Elena, shut up," Mother hissed, suddenly animated. She lunged forward, but Isabella's security guard stepped in her way. "Let her speak," Isabella commanded. Elena took a deep breath. She looked at me, and I saw deep shame in her eyes. "Anthony," she said, "the night I broke up with you, the night your mother told me Derek needed me more, that wasn't the only reason I left." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I had student loans," Elena said, tears spilling over. $80,000 in art school debt. My parents couldn't help me. I was drowning. Your mother. She knew that. I looked at my mother. She was staring at the floor, refusing to meet my gaze. She offered me a deal, Elena continued. She said if I married Derek, she would pay off my loans in full. A wedding gift. She said Derek needed a wife to look respectable so investors would trust him, and I needed a way out of debt. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. Where did she get $80,000, Elena? We weren't rich. Dad was frugal. Elena shook her head. I didn't ask. I just took the check. It was a cashier's check. I can answer that. The forensic accountant spoke up from the corner. He had his laptop open, connected to the house's Wi-Fi. I've been tracing the family accounts since last night. There was a large withdrawal 10 years ago from a separate trust account. The Grandmother Redgrave Trust. The room went deadly silent. My grandmother, Nana Rose. She had died when I was 18. She had left a small inheritance. But Mother had always told me there was nothing left, that Nana had spent it all on medical bills. That trust, the accountant adjusted his glasses, was designated specifically for the education and advancement of Anthony Redgrave. I felt the air leave my lungs. What? It was your money, Anthony, the accountant confirmed. $100,000. Left to you in your grandmother's will. Your mother was the trustee. She liquidated it 10 years ago. I turned to my mother. The rage I felt wasn't hot anymore. It was absolute zero. It froze my blood. You stole my inheritance, I whispered. You stole the money Nana left for me? And you used it to buy my girlfriend for Derek? Mother looked up. Her eyes were wet, but defiant. I had to. Derek was in trouble. He had gambling debts even back then. He needed a wife to settle him down. And you were so capable, Anthony. You were always so smart. I knew you could make it on your own. You didn't need the money. Derek did. So you punished me for being strong? I asked, my voice trembling. And you rewarded him for being weak? That's what a mother does, she screamed. She protects the weakest cub. No. Isabella stepped forward, her voice cutting through the hysteria like a blade. That is not what a mother does. That is what a monster does. You didn't protect him, you crippled him. You taught him that he could steal, lie, and cheat, and you would always bail him out. And you cannibalized your competent son to feed your incompetent one. Isabella turned to the lawyers. Add it to the list. Embezzlement of trust funds. We're pressing charges for that too unless she signs over her pension. My pension, Mother gasped. That's all I have left. Sign it, I said, or I will testify. I will put you in jail, Mom. I swear to God, I will put you in jail. She looked at me. She searched my face for any trace of the little boy who used to beg for her affection. She found nothing but a man who was done playing games. With a shaking hand, she picked up the pen. She signed the house over. She signed the pension over. And you, I turned to Derek. You're done. Tony, please, Derek wept. I can't go to jail. The lawyers will work out a payment plan for the debt, I said, exhausted. You'll be working for the rest of your life to pay me back. Every paycheck you earn, I get 40%. Welcome to the real world, brother. Elena walked over to the table. She placed her wedding ring on top of the documents. I'm sorry, Anthony, she whispered. I was young and scared. I know that's not an excuse. No, I said, looking at the woman I once thought was my soulmate. She looked small and pathetic now. It's not. Goodbye, Elena. She walked out the door. We spent the next 2 hours cataloging the assets. I walked through the house, my childhood home. It felt like walking through a museum of lies. Every painting, every rug, every piece of furniture had been maintained by sacrificing my happiness. I went to my old bedroom. It had been turned into a crypto mining room for Derek. It was hot, filled with dusty servers that were humming loudly. He had erased every trace of me. Isabella found me there. Are you ready to go? She asked. Yeah, I said. Burn it down. Figuratively, she smiled. Figuratively, I agreed. Sell it. Bulldoze it. Turn it into a parking lot. I don't care. I never want to see this address again. As we walked out to the car, my mother was sitting on the front steps, sobbing into her hands. Derek was yelling at someone on the phone, probably a loan shark. I didn't stop. I walked past them, got into the car with my wife, and drove away. This time, I didn't look back. And this time, the silence in the car wasn't heavy. It was the silence of a blank page, waiting to be written. 6 months later, the sound of water trickling over stone is the first thing I hear when I wake up now. We moved out of the city to a property in the Hudson Valley. It wasn't a mansion. Isabella had enough of those growing up. It was a sanctuary. I designed it myself. Floor-to-ceiling glass, sustainable materials, and a garden that integrated seamlessly with the surrounding forest. I stood on the patio, holding 2 mugs of coffee, watching the morning mist lift off the river. "Penny for your thoughts?" Isabella walked out, wrapped in a cashmere blanket. She looked radiant. Her hair was loose, and her hand was resting absent-mindedly on her stomach. A small, barely visible bump. We hadn't told the press yet. The Vance heir would be headline news, and we wanted to keep this for ourselves a little longer. "I was just thinking," I said, handing her the coffee. "About the timeline." "What timeline?" "The timeline where I stayed," I said, looking out at the trees. "The timeline where I married Elena, took a job at a local firm, and spent my life trying to please my mother. I would be miserable. I would be hollow. That timeline doesn't exist," Isabella said firmly, leaning into me. "Because you were never that person. You were always going to leave. You just needed a push." "A push?" I laughed. "It was more like a shove off a cliff." "Well, you learned to fly," she smiled. Life had settled into a new rhythm. Peaceful one. The fallout from the Redgrave purge, as Isabella called it, had been swift and absolute. We sold the Connecticut estate to a developer who bulldozed the house to build a cluster of eco-friendly condos. I found it poetic. The monument to my mother's ego was replaced by affordable housing for 30 families. My mother was currently residing in the Meadows, a state-subsidized assisted living facility. It wasn't luxury, but it was clean. Isabella and I paid for her basic necessities, but nothing more. No more Chanel. No more Chardonnay. Just a small room and a lot of time to think. She called me once a week, complaining about the food or the staff. I listened for exactly 5 minutes, then hung up. I didn't hate her anymore. I just felt a distant pity for her. She was a general without an army. Derek's fate was perhaps the most satisfying. Without the house to leverage and without mother to bail him out, his world collapsed. He declared bankruptcy. Last I heard, he was working as a shift manager at a car rental agency near the airport. He was finally learning the value of $1. He sent me a check for $200 last month, his court-mandated restitution. I framed it. It hangs in my office as a reminder that justice exists, even if it takes a decade. Elena moved back with her parents in Ohio. She sent me a long letter apologizing again. I didn't reply. I didn't wish her ill, but she belonged to a chapter of my life that was closed. "Hey!" Isabella nudged me. "We're going to be late." "Late for what?" "The visit," she said softly. I nodded. "Right." An hour later, we were standing in a small, quiet cemetery on the outskirts of my hometown. It was the only reason I ever returned. The grave was simple. Robert Redgrave, beloved father. I knelt down and placed a fresh bouquet of hydrangeas, his favorite, on the grass. "Hey, Dad," I whispered. The wind rustled the leaves of the oak tree above us. "I did what you told me," I said. "I left. I built something. And I found someone." I looked up at Isabella, who was standing back a little to give me privacy. She smiled and touched her stomach. "And I'm going to be a dad," I told the headstone. "And I promise you this. I will never make my child feel like they are second best. I will never make them compete for my love. I will break the cycle." I stayed there for a long time just talking to him. I told him about the new house, about Isabella's company, about the baby. I told him that I forgave him for not being stronger, because I knew he did the best he could to save me in the end. That $5,000 he slipped me was my seed money, but his permission to leave was my freedom. When I stood up, my knees were a bit stiff, but my heart was light. Isabella walked over and took my hand. Ready to go home? Yeah, I said. Let's go home. As we walked back to the car, I realized that for the first time in 34 years, I knew exactly what that word meant. Home wasn't a building. It wasn't a bloodline. It wasn't a last name. Home was the people who looked at you and saw you, not what they could take from you. Home was the hand holding yours when the world fell apart. Home was the peace of knowing that you are enough. I opened the car door for my wife, the CEO, the shark, the love of my life. She slid in and I walked around to the driver's side. I took one last look at the town that had tried to bury me. I smiled. They tried to bury me, but they didn't know I was a seed. I started the engine and we drove into our future. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of my journey. This story wasn't just about money or revenge or a surprise CEO wife. It was about something much deeper, toxic loyalty. The hardest lesson I had to learn, and the lesson I hope you take away from this, is that you have the right to fire your family. If someone constantly diminishes your worth, steals your joy, or demands you set yourself on fire to keep them warm, they are not family. They are an anchor, and you have every right to cut the rope. True family isn't born, it's built. I found my family in a woman who challenged me in the rain. I found my family in the self-respect I built brick by brick. Thank you for listening. Stay strong and keep building.